Hey guys, and welcome back to the Ground Up Show. Today, my guest is David Sherry. He is the co-founder of Death to Stock, a membership community that delivers personal, non-stock, curated photos and videos. On the podcast this week, we talk about why you should be growing your audience slow and with integrity. I try to convince David that he's actually a minimalist, which he thought was kind of funny. And also, we talk about why experimenting will lead to your biggest breakthroughs, both in your personal and work life. This is the podcast. I find it to be very compelling is like, how do you grow an audience? But not only that, because like some people have the experience of a viral event taking off their career in terms of growing an audience, but then you don't have a say over who those people are. And maybe that thing that made you viral wasn't the best representation of what you stand for. And now you have this audience of people that like maybe doesn't actually connect or resonate with your ideas.
But fascinating. I sort of feel like it's the opposite for me, and like what I personally want is the opposite. I've been joking about this thing, which is like a slow growth hacker, which is somebody who like takes their time and like really tries to build as tight-knit of a community as possible through not necessarily just going viral. And I think it's like, obviously it's very popular right now to try to get a viral hit. So you maybe are trying to be salacious or something like that in the content you create. And I feel like people are sort of wanting more depth than that, and like people are smart and they want to talk about interesting topics. So like building content that's meaningful and growing your audience slowly, I think that's, I guess, how I want to approach my work. So
yeah, I think you build more respect, more trust. There's more intimacy. You can be vulnerable because, like you said, when you get popular because of a viral event, you have no control over. I mean, you almost become, for a lot of people, a meme. Like, if you even look at some of these people that become viral in these meme photos that get shared around, and it's like, they are now a caricature. And how would they even if they wanted to leverage it, even if they didn't want to, and they still wanted to, like, present themselves online as they truly are, that's an uphill battle. And, like, you see it so many times, and especially people who maybe get misrepresented, their views get misrepresented. How do they then correct that and make people think that they're, see who they truly are? Sure.
It gets away from you, almost like you have this thing happen and then all these other people are talking about it or commenting, and you don't necessarily get to start from the foundation that you want. And happy to give like a quick background if that's helpful on me.
Let's do that. We did just run into it.
Sure. So 6 years ago, I started an email list, which is called Death to the Stock Photo. And I was basically a failed photographer. I was trying to shoot for brands. And it just wasn't exactly working out. I was pitching companies, trying to be a full-time photographer for them, back in the early days of Instagram, and nobody wanted to hire me. So I started an email list. It was called Death to the Stock Photo, and with my friend Allie, shout out to Allie Lehman. And the premise was very simple. Sign up for our email list, and we will send you 10 free images every week, or every month actually, to your inbox. And you can use those in your own blog, website, pitch deck, whatever it is that you want. We're going to go on these little missions every month and shoot content that you can use yourself. Because a lot of our peers were freelancers themselves, web designers, and it was difficult, I think, at that time, 6 years ago, to find high quality content to use in your projects. I mean, now I think the market's changed a lot, but you probably remember back in the day, the way stock photos sort of were at that time. It was all very cheesy, very staged.
It's still, I think, that what people think of when they think of stock photo or stock video, you think of the corny business shot of people pointing at computer screens, and that's what that's what comes to mind.
I think it was just very literal. I don't think that they were going for any type of emotional connection in the content they were making. I think what they were going for was, let's like literally translate two people shaking hands in front of a desk, and like that was like maybe the words that people were searching or something. So I think what we tried to do when we started this email list was, one, the content's going to look different. It's going to be a bit more artistic, a bit more real. Two, we're going to share the story behind how this content is actually being produced. So it's not just like some random person standing in front of a thing, shaking hands. We actually went on this road trip and we met these people and they let us shoot in their space. And in that way, the the email list itself sort of started like a lifestyle blog, I think is maybe a better like analogy for it. It just so happened that the lifestyle blog that you were following, you could use all the content you saw. So I think that's how people sort of started to like understand who we were, is like, I'm following these people, these photographers, they're doing interesting things, they're traveling, they're taking photos, and I like their story, I like hearing from them, but everything they're sending me, I can also use myself. So it's kind of like a power up for our users as well.
Right. And does that go to the build it slow, build it small, let's not try to like go viral and compromise our morals or the premise in which this was founded?
Yeah, so it started as a landing page. So all it was an email list off of one landing page, which was still up for probably 2 years. And the way we grew was very organic. It was definitely spending a lot of time. If people were using our photos online, I'd search through like image, search on Google and see people using it, and I'd comment on their blog, or people would send us what they were making with the images, and I'd maybe give them feedback, or so just like any way to connect directly with people. And we definitely had sort of like a bigger start. I think there was like some luck in that when we started putting out this email list and this content, we probably had like 5,000 people sign up like within like 2 or 3 months. So that's like a pretty quick growth trajectory for email. And everything we did was always step by step. So it started with this landing page. We'd start sending out these emails. It started growing. We crowdfunded a road trip, which was basically this tour around the US, where anybody who was on our email list, if they wanted to see us travel or go around the US to create new media for our subscribers, they could back it. And I think it was like $5 or $10. So like I feel like we did a lot in the early days to like engage with, like very quickly we crowdfunded that. And so I feel like we did a lot in the early days to very much like engage with people. And even when we traveled, we met up with subscribers. So we said, next week we're going to be in this city, who wants to hang out? Next week we're going to be in this city, who wants to hang out? So everything has been very step by step, and everything has been very personal and direct with our subscribers.
If you think about like when you were first going to launch this thing, just a landing page, very simple. Did you overthink it? Were you like, this is not ready? Or did you like delay releasing it? Or was it, hey, let's just get this up and running. This is V1. We can change it on the fly. It's not going to matter because people aren't listening or watching anyway.
Yeah, totally. I think I'd come off of a few failed projects. Like I said, so actually I was pitching companies to be a full-time photographer for them because I saw Instagram was taking off, and I was telling them, hey, like, this thing Instagram, it's probably gonna be big. You need high quality photos all the time. Let me be that person that creates them for you. And I had a series of rejections there, and I tried some other random like it very much came off of like, maybe I'll try this thing. Like, what if I just went direct to people and shared my work with them instead of waiting to sort of get chosen by one of these brands, which rightfully probably shouldn't have hired me anyways. I was like just out of school, like I don't know if I had the credentials necessarily for that, but I was waiting to get picked. I wanted one of these brands to say, yes, you go be a photographer. And I think the email list and the landing page was like, why don't I just be a photographer, and just like, if anyone wants to see my work or use my work, they can use it.
I think that's the way to go. I think too many people are waiting for that opportunity, waiting for somebody to hand something for them or give them the job. And I think a lot of people would be more fulfilled if they like went out and learned it themselves, started getting clients and freelance work. At what point did you decide to like make that change? Like at what point are you like, I mean, it sounds like it was pretty early on. You'd been a photographer for a little while. I don't know what your chops were at that point, but then making that transition from like, hey, let me try to get these people to hire me to screw this.
Yeah, I think I jumped really quickly into pitching. So like I definitely started before I was ready, I think in a good way, in trying to get these brands on board. That's ultimately why I didn't get picked by them. And actually, like, so ironically, the thing I was pitching them was a road trip around the US where I would create content for their social channels. And so what's kind of fun, it was actually a year later when we crowdfunded our own trip, it was like my own version of that done again. Just with my own audience. So it was cool. It was kind of a fun, like retribution a little bit almost of like, okay, like, so that concept was actually about the same, but yeah, I mean, I don't think I just expected it to take off. I think I probably had 2 months of feeling sorry for myself that I got rejected by like all these brands. And then it was like, yeah, why not just share it and just see what happens?
I think there's probably too many people now, especially like, I mean, that was 6-7 years ago. But then when we're talking about today, I don't think even if you're a talented photographer, like to get a brand deal, to just reach out to one of these companies to work with you, it's going to be an uphill battle because there is so much talent out there. I think that's when like having an audience that backs you is in a lot of ways like the new self-reliance. Like,
that was completely it. Yeah. There's a book by James Altucher called Choose Yourself. And I think that was very pivotal for me. And yeah, you have to kind of create I didn't want to have something that could just fall apart. And I think if you're waiting to get picked all the time, it's sort of risky. You have to always go out there and make the next sale. But if you have an audience that supports you, it's a slightly different story. You have a little bit more resilience. So I think that was always something that was appealing to me. I just had to fail a little bit first to remember that almost.
Are there some principles about building this community? And like, I mean, is that possible? Is it, it's online. Is it possible to have that community feel even as the audience grows to beyond 5,000 subscribers?
Yeah. Yeah. So it grew really quickly, right? So like it was 5,000 and then it was 20,000 and then it was like 150,000. And I think for sure your audience changes, but I think one thing that we try to do that sort of, I feel like always kept things being a bit more tight knit with our community was it was still always like pretty personal. So like, yes, we turned into a company and I can get to that. Like eventually it was monetized but it still very much functions sort of like that same kind of story of us going out there, taking images to support this community. And even though some people were paying, it was very much like we're trying to support our audience, and that's what we're spending our time on. So I think that led to a closer sort of relationship with people, even just sharing like random stuff. Like I feel like we did a lot of stuff that wasn't necessarily photo focused or I guess we just didn't try to be like a robotic machine that was trying to like grow really quickly. It was like we'd talk about what we're up to or so yeah, I think just being more transparent, I think was a big key there.
I think that's the problem with most companies and most people is they just want to grow so fast, so quick. And that's usually when things fall apart. Yeah. My friend Jason Zook, who was on the podcast, he did. I don't know if you heard about this. I think I told you about it, but maybe the I wear your shirt guy. Yeah. So he like had all these projects and like from the outside, wildly successful. He scaled up I wear your t-shirt. So he basically got these brands to pay him. It went like $1 a day for the first day, $2 to wear it the second day. By the end of the year, $365. He ended up scaling it over 3 to 4 years. These brands would pay him to wear their brand logo on their shirt, and he would do a video. He did a video every day for 865 days, and he scaled it to have like 3, 4, or 5 people wearing shirts every day.
Oh
like,
man, more than just him, right?
He turned it into like this big business, and he ended up having an overhead. His costs were $20,000 to $30,000 every month.
Yeah,
and and he ended up having to borrow money from his grandparents to like pay for it. He's like, I know I'm going to get the money at the end of the year, but in the beginning of the year, it's like really slow and I'm only making like 10, 15 bucks a day.
You get pressure and then the purity sort of changes. I think that's the issue a little bit with scale is one, your customers, your users become numbers, right? It's like you're looking at metrics and you're not thinking about them as people. And so, I'd get tons of email replies and I still do get a lot of email replies that like, you want to take the time to respond to those people individually. It's not just, even if they're not paying you, So I think all the things that don't scale are always typically like, that's probably one main principle that I'd say that I try to always adhere to. Like anything you can do that doesn't scale is actually how you build scale. So, when we did our road trip, not only were we meeting people in different cities, so like anybody who wants to come hang out, like we'll buy you coffee, whatever. We sent like handwritten notes to 250 people or whatever. Like, yeah, I think it was just like chipping away at any time you could make a bigger connection with somebody through something that didn't scale, like do it.
Yeah, what was that thing that you did where it was like trying to find the furthest, most remote people or subscribers?
Yeah, so we did like an email campaign that was called Way Out There. And the premise was who's the farthest person in our audience? Who's the farthest person away from us or the most remote? And we wanted to know where you lived and like a little bit about your story. And we would send like the top 5 people who sort of submitted some type of care package, like a creative care package. And so we just opened that up to our audience. We just said like, hey, way out there, like who's way out there being a creative, how are you living the non-stock lifestyle? What are your coordinates? Like send us your like latitude, longitude. And if we like your story, we'll send you something in the mail. And I was just blown away. This was probably 3 years in, so maybe there was maybe like 200,000 people on our list or something like that. And we got stories from the most crazy random places that I just never would have imagined. I mean, Tunisia, Africa, like Northern Highlands of Scotland, small towns in the Philippines. And the stories that people submitted were just so fascinating and almost like emotional. Like I feel like I cried reading a lot of these responses. Is just people saying like, I live in, this area in this small town. I'm the only person who's a photographer. I'm the only person with a camera. And like not many people get me, but when I receive your email or when I engage with this community, I feel like I have like this lifeline to like, a creative sphere that I don't get to see all the time. So that was like a really meaningful way that actually we learned a lesson, which is when I started the company, I thought, okay, like our main audience, like the people that we want to serve, it's like the Apple designer, right? They've got the iPad and they've got 5 screens and they have all the latest tech. And in reality, you find out that the people who are most meaningful, I think, in your audience are not those people. Those people actually have all the resources they need. They have meetups they can go to every night. They have the budget to buy, they can hire a photographer and stuff. But you've got these people who are way out there who I feel like have less of those resources or community. So what you're doing for them is more meaningful. So I think that was a big like flip that kind of switch that flipped for me was, oh, our audience is not this like idyllic designer. It's actually just like the everyday people. And when you start talking to them on the phone, it's someone who's starting a yo-yo shop or somebody who's teaching some really random skill or, it's just not what you expect, but I think in a good way. Like you see that they're human and so that was like a good change, I think, for me along the way.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, especially when we're young and maybe sometimes with entrepreneurs and creators specifically, we have almost an ego to be like, I know what my audience wants. Yeah. I know what I need to be creating. And this goes true for like product designers. If you're making an app for somebody as much as it does for somebody who's making a film, a video, or a company, it's once you start to get some customers or an audience, it's listening and taking a step back and be like, well, what are they reacting to? Because you can make so many assumptions about what these people might connect with or what this person might look like. Like you said, you think of the Apple designer, and that's what I think most people would think of. And I think when you even look at some of these other stock companies out there, it seems like that's who they're creating
for. Right.
But I like that approach to just let's actually engage with the audience and see where they're at.
Yeah. One other thing we did is, and this was like, I feel like this is like the gut sort of feel you're talking about for like who your audience is and maybe what they might be needing right now, almost in a way. It was actually the day after the election here. And regardless of your political interest, it was like a stressful time, I think, in the country, just obviously. And so I was actually in Big Sur when that was going on. And that night I was at the beach and I took like a 30-second video of the ocean at Big Sur. The next morning I wake up, I know, the world is in an interesting spot. And so I emailed out a video of the beach and I had like a 1-sentence thing that was like, hey, how about we all just take a breath? And it was just, all it was a video of waves. It was from my iPhone. It was not quality. And I think that is what builds community. It's not, it's not always just the utility that you're providing. It's like, hey, I'm a person too. I know you all are people. What if we all took a breath together and like, here's a cool wave thing I saw yesterday. And I think that's another example of like, I think brands have a hard time taking that type of risk. And yeah, I didn't say anything political. I just was like, yeah, here's a beautiful ocean. Let's all look at it together. And that was very well received,
Yeah, I think that's the thing that frustrates me with a lot of the entrepreneurial self-help type people out there. I mean, for every James Altucher, there's like 100 other people who are like imitations of like this eccentric person who's like, oh, you gotta hustle, you gotta make all the money. Totally. Like, because it's almost like it's like a plague that's just overrun, and everybody's like, we gotta hustle, gotta work hard. Yeah. And then Jason again, he said, he's like, well, what is it all for? Why are you working so hard? Why are you putting in all this effort? If at the end of the day you're overweight, unhealthy, and like miserable, and you don't even like the stuff you're making, what was the point of even doing it?
Totally. Yeah. And so I think it's even just like being like, I think what's happening actually, which is interesting from a community perspective right now, and from like an entrepreneur, blogger, like influencer perspective is like, I think people are more attracted to people who aren't necessarily putting themselves on a big pedestal. So I think to swing in the other direction, away from all these people who are saying like, I'm a millionaire, here's how I did it, you should be doing it too. I think that people are swinging the other way. And what I'm trying to do with my own communities right now, and this is like a big focus of mine, is it's not necessarily like removing myself from being like the central point, but I'm trying to surface other people's voices. So when we, not just my own. So when we sent out the email that was, hey, who's the most way out there person, we collected like 300 to 400 responses from people all over the globe. Well, we just packaged those up and shared them with everybody. So like the next email was like, here's like 50 stories we heard from other people in the community. And so it's not us saying what we learned from that experience. It was like, let's just showcase other people in our community and what they're thinking. And I think the more you can remove yourself from like this like pedestal spot and open up room for other voices who are in the community to share, I think it's a smart move strategically, but I also think it's just like more enjoyable. So a lot of the stuff I'm doing right now is like trying to like open source or like decentralize a little bit, I think is one way of putting it, which is how do I involve other voices who are also in the same interest group and the same mission as me to also have a voice at the table. So involving your community, Is there a way that you've found to do that works best? Because a lot of times people follow you for you. Sure. They follow the voice that they're looking for. And even if that voice, like for one, is like not on a pedestal and not like, I know everything, like these are the 12 steps to success, like I learned them from scratch. and like, dude, I get like, and it's part of like being in this space, but I get the Instagram advertisements and like the swipe up, you got to swipe up. Totally. There's this one guy who was burning his book. He's like, I'm literally burning my book. Buy it before it like scorches my hand. Yeah. And I'm like, Jesus, like, can you guys just relax? And like, where's the self-deprecation? Where's the, I actually don't know it all. Cause like there's way more of those people out there than I think. Crazy. Yeah. They're just not speaking up. I think what you're really talking about here is leadership. So you can still lead a community forward. You can still create the right structure, and you can still sort of be that person who's connecting things without always necessarily being like the me to you voice almost, if that makes sense. So I think it's very much about like, definitely people are following these bloggers and stuff like that for their voice, but I think you can also lead through opening a space for other people. And like, I think a good example is just like, if you hosted an in-person meetup, like you probably wouldn't just like talk the entire time. You'd maybe connect people, you'd walk around the room and say like, you two should meet. And you'd set the stage and you'd think about like, where should we host this? What type of food or cocktail? Like, so I think like that's the leader host, like instigator is sort of the role, I suppose, that I'm trying to now put myself in, versus the only like dominant voice. And I can give one other example. So I have like a little separate email list. It's called Creative Caffeine. And the premise was like, hey, it's has nothing to do with photos. So if you want to like hang out and chat about creativity without being photography related, I'm sure you feel this sometimes, you like want a different outlet. Like come over to this other email list and we'll like chat and hang out. And the first thing I did was in the welcome email, it was like, please hit reply. 1, I want to interact with you. 2, I want to share what your thoughts are based on the stuff we're talking about. So I'll still write articles and I'll still prompt, I'll like pose a discussion or pose a topic and I'll give my 2 cents about it. But I'm very much looking for other people's input and perspective. And then I typically share that as well. So I'm sharing a lot of other people's responses or their take on this topic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it seems like, I don't know if you did this intentionally, but it seems like everything that you do has some minimalist principles in it.
Ooh, I'm curious to hear this.
I mean, when you look at what you're doing, it's like the core is an email newsletter.
Yeah, definitely.
And you have the ability, since you're just focusing and being like, well, this is the core of what we do. This is how we communicate. This is how we connect and interact with each other. What's nice is even, it's like, a lot of times it's not even like public. Like everything is always like, look at what I made. Everybody come to my YouTube channel and watch my stuff. And because you're trying to get as many views as you can. And now it's like, well, here are actually like all these like thousands of intimate interactions that are happening. But like being able to create these 300 things to send people that are far out there. And you couldn't do that if you had 5 different platforms you were trying to manage and create content for. It's like, it seems like you're very focused and direct about the stuff that you're making.
Yeah.
And it allows you to scale up in ways that other people can't when they have all these things.
Yeah, there's something fun. Well, one, I think it creates a little bit more of a safe space. And there's a little bit of an allure as well of like, why am I not hearing about this? Like, how did I just find this? So, you know, it's kind of fun to get emails from people who are just like, you know, how did I never find this before? So I think there's a little bit of like an allure. It's kind of fun to have that. We never have an about page. I have one on my personal website, but Death to Stock has never had an about page. I think that's fun. It's like, who's doing this? And in that way, it's almost more of like a mission. So if you have your mission there, if you have your philosophy, if it's very much baked into what you are expressing, it almost feels a little bit more like a movement than whatever, a company or something like that. And I kind of lost my train of thought.
Did that happen by accident? The no about page, or was that like you just? I mean, at first it started out as just a landing page, but there are certain things that we always just say, well, of course we need an about page, a contact thing, and like everything else that goes with it, and like an Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Like you have these expectations that you need to be everywhere and be doing everything everybody's doing. How did you first start to question those norms?
I think it was by accident. I think a lot of what we've learned has been through experimentation, and then you sort of learn it by accident. So all of these things that I think in a discussion with somebody right now, I could be like, here's all these interesting stuff I've learned about building an audience or building a brand. I don't think they were that intentional at first, and I think a lot of them were experiments. So I'd say a lot of it was in retrospect. Some of it maybe was the minimalism, like you said, like we don't need to have a big site. We don't need to have all these channels. Like we don't need to be on that network yet. And so I think maybe by default a little bit, you put constraints around things. I really like email as a constraint, because you can do so much stuff with it. And because it has to fit into this email, I feel like that flexed our creativity a lot, because you can start to rethink what should an email feel like. And that's actually been one of my other favorite things. And I think email has come back around. 2 years ago, email was not like cool. I think
wasn't sexy.
I think email is cool again because like social media got really noisy.
True.
But
and then also like noisy, and also people felt like they didn't have any control because they were like, well, they changed the algorithm. What the hell? Now I'm only reaching, I'm only getting 100 likes per photo when I used to get 1,000.
Yep, totally. But I also think there's something to be said for like taking risk and taking like emotional risk. And it's all these campaigns that we could talk about that I feel like really boosted our community engagement or like made people feel more attached to our brand felt really scary up front. Like who just like sends an email out to a lot of people with just like a crappy iPhone video of a wave being like, hey, let's all breathe together. Like all that stuff did not feel as easy as it is to look back at now and be like, oh yeah, duh. All that stuff felt like a risk. So I also like how people don't expect you to do those things. Like I don't think it's the norm. And so the inbox is fun. And my favorite thing is when people say, this is like the only email that I enjoy opening. And it's like, because there's so much terrible spam, I almost think that's better, right? Because like, let everybody go crazy with spam. Like I'm going to send something totally different and weird, and it's going to break their mental model almost of what they think email should be.
People are getting sold to every single day by everybody. I mean, like advertising and sponsors is one thing, but then it's like people who are trying to get you to sign up for their Facebook page or like their new page or whatever it is. It's like, it gets overwhelming. Totally. And like when you're actually creating something and there's really no intention behind it, there's not like, you're not trying to get anything from somebody, but you're saying, hey, just breathe, just relax. Come on, it's going to be fine. The world's still turning. Yeah. That kind of stuff I think is so cool. And it's also, there's like an innocence to it that I think is like, is that challenging to maintain? Because you want to be showing up authentically all the time. And then when you do it and then it's successful, now obviously there's going to be people out there that are going to be manipulative about it and be like, well, that worked. Let me try to see if I can, artificially create connection. Yeah. But then it's like, how do you just be authentic without worrying about the response?
Everything is in the feeling and the intention behind something. I think someone could create the exact same campaign as me and maybe even word to word, but if they had a different intention when they were creating it, it will show through in the content. So I think maintaining that innocence is very important. And I think it's almost more in the feeling that you personally have when you're approaching it. like if I had done that campaign because I wanted a certain response, I just feel like it shows through. I would have picked, slightly different words, or my subject copy would have been sort of spammy, like open this if you want to like breathe because the world's on fire, whatever I would have said.
It would have been very easy to make a clickbait title from that.
Yeah. So I think actually the hardest thing is maintaining, I call it like the no agenda sort of attitude, which is like, I don't have any agenda here. I'm not trying to sell you. I want to share my perspective. Maybe you have a perspective too. And I think the more I can like create that naturally, like you almost have to feel that way. Like I almost had to feel, it's an interesting time in our country right now. Other people probably feel that way. Maybe I should just share this like thing and see if other people like, yeah, it's hard because I feel like you have to actually feel like that. Like if you don't actually truly have that intention, I think it goes south.
I think maybe another minimalist principle that you unknowingly or knowingly have.
This is good.
I'm just forcing minimalism on you.
Yeah, right. The minimalism.
Yeah, you are now a minimalist. But it seems like this also comes from a place of having enough. Because if you didn't feel like I have enough, my audience is enough, they're big enough, I'm I'm connecting with enough people, I have enough money, then that kind of intention will seep into everything you do. And I think that's why a lot of people end up like they seem like very eager and antsy and anxious to get your attention.
I think that's a great insight. I think once again, it goes back to leadership a little bit. Like a safe leader does not need anything from you. They are here to cultivate the space. They're here to support. And so I think that's a great point, is that paired with this sort of innocence or like this no agenda attitude is, hey, I'm good. And if you think about, the Death of Stock email list, it sort of was an abundant thing, right? We're just going to give you photos. We don't have any expectation. Sign up, and you're going to get photos in your inbox every month, and they're free. And I think people were blown away that that was like actually a thing. Like it's sort of like, oh, this is like cool, but like it's probably going to suck. And then you get your emails and you're like, oh, these are like very good photos. So people are even almost skeptical sometimes, I think, when you have that, like, no, it's cool. Like you can use them or not, or sign up or unsubscribe, but like, this is like a thing we're doing over here. And if you're into that, we'd love to have you. So, yeah. So
you said a lot of the success came through experimenting. Do you think like when we're trying to give advice to other people, is it the act of experimenting which leads to success, or I'm sure there were some principles that were like, well, you should do this, you should do this. Like what was the balance there between like, did you figure out the secret to success? Honestly,
I think that the experiment creates magic in some way. And I think the tough work is understanding how to cultivate that. So like you start this email list, people start signing up. And I think a lot of like the work or advice is like not probably honestly more around the stuff we're talking about right now, like not going too quickly into like the sales mode, like letting it be nurtured, approaching things from the way we're talking about. So I sort of feel like with each project that we do, we're trying to experiment our way into seeing something interesting. So I think you experiment to see, will someone's eyes light up if they see this? Will someone say like, oh, that's really different and interesting? Like I feel like, you experiment to change somebody in like a really impactful way, even if it's like one person or 5 people are like, oh, that's amazing, I want to do what you're doing, or I want to sign up for that. Once you've figured out that, which I think is the hardest part, is like actually making a strong impact on somebody. I think the hard work is then maintaining and cultivating and growing it without losing its purity, which is sort of like what we talked about. So I guess if I was to distill that into advice, I wouldn't double down on something if I didn't feel like it was like interesting and very impactful, even to a very small amount of people. So I would try to not keep going if you're doing something that isn't really like changing someone, even if it's just one person who are like, oh, like I'm so happy this is here now. Or I'm so glad you like made this, or this really touched me. Will you make another one? So I think a lot of it isn't even the beginning. Like experiment until you see something that works, and then you have the hard work of scaling that and building it while maintaining its purity.
I think it like having those little wins early on, like
that's huge.
I mean, it is so impactful to have a couple people. Like the first comment on, a YouTube video that you get, that's a really, really big deal. Yeah. The first, like maybe somebody pays for your work for the first time, whether it's $10 or $100, that's a big deal. Like you don't forget those firsts. And they help to motivate you forward.
Yeah.
But like if you're not getting a first, then maybe what you're doing, maybe you need to change it up a little bit, because everybody should be able to get to a point where they experiment enough where they can add some value that it actually impacts somebody enough to be like, hey, this was really cool.
Oh, for sure. I think most people, they actually run into this problem where they're trying to do something that fits them into a box that feels like safer. So rather than experimenting the thing that you think would be really cool, you're like, well, maybe I should do it like those other people. So I try to make it like that. And like, they really remove a lot of their, almost like insight and innovation and like unique genius almost from the project or the product. And so I feel like when I talk to people about what they're working on, this is like a really common thing that comes up is like, yeah, well, I'm like making this thing and it's like a, course, and I'm talking about like how to, do X, Y, and Z. And like, I don't know, I just can't figure out how to grow my audience. And then through the discussion, they'll be like, oh yeah. And then I had this one idea of like, I would do this crazy other project. And like, that idea sounds amazing to me. And I'm just like, that is like, your story is amazing. I was touched by you telling me that. I don't know why you're doing this other, it's like this is like the whole death to stock, like non-stock, like, are you taking the stock route of doing something? And it's like, oh yeah, to be a blogger, I have to do this, this, and this. And then you just end up fitting in and it's not interesting.
Yeah. It's the taking the safe route because you've seen other people do it.
Yeah.
Because it's, well, if I make this course and I put it out there, I'm probably going to be able to sell 50 of them if I do it for $100. And okay, that's enough money for like the next couple months to pay rent and bills. And it's like, I think they're justified feelings, and it's very scary,
for sure.
Especially even like we were talking about growing an audience and going viral. There's a lot of appeal to want to do that because like you're worried you're not going to be successful, you're not going to make it, you're not going to be able to make a business or a living from what you're trying to create. So I think it takes a lot of courage to be able to do the thing that's weird, that maybe won't work, but it's something that's true to who you are and you're telling a story that you actually believe in.
Yeah, and maybe that's part of the error in the pressure of the entrepreneur bro or whatever, is that you have to crush it right now. And if you're not making $10,000 off of your thing right now through affiliates, like, you're not making it. And I think, yeah, a lot of this stuff that is meaningful probably develops a little bit more naturally, a little bit more slowly. And I do think that part of the luck is how quickly that faucet sort of turns on. But if you have something interesting and unique to say, I think that people want to gravitate towards that. I think everyone has that available.
I think one of the problems too is like the comparing ourselves to other people. That's one of the things that I had trouble with when like you see all these people putting out their financial reports online.
Yeah,
I get it. And like for sometimes it's helpful. Sometimes you're like, oh wow, that's really interesting. Like I'm really glad I have that information now and I see where all their money's going. But 9 times out of 10, it makes you feel horrible because you're like, this person's making $100,000 a month. Like, what the hell?
Yeah, totally.
So, and then it just puts us down that rabbit hole where we feel like we need to keep up with those that are, on that same playing field as us. And that's one of the things that like all happiness researchers say, especially when you're talking about income and well-being. It's your income and your well-being is directly correlated to how you feel compared to other people around you.
Sure, yeah.
So if your neighbor gets a raise and has a new car and, you feel like, oh, well, I'm not doing that well. So you feel insecure compared to them. But if they had $10,000 less than you, you would feel good.
Yeah.
So it's
a tough trap.
That's, I think, what we are as humans. It's just like built into our DNA. And I think we have to it takes a lot of mindfulness to get out of that trap.
Well, not only is it built into our DNA, we have these social counters that are on every network that you see every day, and we associate follower count with influence. And it doesn't ever really exactly translate one-to-one with their happiness or their success. And it's hard. Yeah, I've definitely been thinking about this a little bit myself too, because I feel like to maintain what we're talking about of almost like that innocence and like not immediately jumping into that thing or not like pushing really hard in that direction because you think that's the right thing to do. I feel like it's easier if you're not so much seeing all that all the time. Then again, I also try to be very aware of what the landscape is and what's going on, because it helps you make decisions. It helps you know where you should sit, in a positioning standpoint. So it's, I don't have an answer to how engaged or how like removed from the world, I guess that I personally should be. And I'm trying to figure that out too. I think it's really tough.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a practice, and I find myself slipping sometimes, especially when my YouTube channel started growing. It was like the first thing I would do in the morning is, because like it was crazy. I mean, it was like a month or two of going from 3,000 subscribers to like 100,000, which was wild. And like, I mean, honestly, I have a video where I was like talking about the first 400 subscribers. I think I went from 150 to 300 subscribers overnight on YouTube, and I was like, this is crazy. I'm so excited.
Right,
like,
right.
are you crazy? Like, it's 150 people. I was like, that's a lot of people. And then now it's like, to see that growth, you get swept up in it over that 2-month period, and I'm checking it every day. And then, you know, YouTube does this funny thing where they'll clear out a bunch, and that wakes you up, because then you like, I lost 8,000 in a day. And I was like my worth was gone.
Totally.
And I only say that to say that, like, it's easy to get swept up in it. And then I had to build a practice of being like, well, listen, my audience size is enough. I'm happy with it. I'm not going to check it every single day. It's not changing anything. And it's not helping. But to your point, it is nice to see the industry, to see what competitors are doing, and to understand it, but not let it totally influence and sway what you're doing.
And I think you want to like bring you as much as possible and not necessarily try to like copy what other people are doing. I just don't think that it works that well. I think the most authentic stuff you put out is when it's your own sort of idea. But it's funny you mentioned the sort of like culling of the list. We just did this recently where like we pay a lot of money to MailChimp just for like to host the subscribers. And we for sure have been a little bit, I think, caught on that number too, right? Like you hit a certain number of subscribers and it's like, it's fun to tell people it. We actually hid that for a while, but then we were like, started doing it. And I think we're probably cleaning 100,000 to 200,000 people from our email list, like probably this month. Because people, you know, and probably for good reason. Like sometimes people liked it for one time and now they don't, or they switch jobs and there's an email that's just sitting there that like was from their old job. It doesn't get checked.
So you can tell that this person hasn't used the email in like 6 months or hasn't checked it in a while.
Yeah, we just have never dug through and like done that. And then so what you start doing is you start looking at your stats. And I think what you see is actually a good thing and a bad thing, right? Like at first you're like, oh, now we're going to remove like 100,000 people from this email list. Like that's crazy. But then you say, if we have those people removed, like our open rate like doubles, our click rate doubles, because without all those people, now you have accurate metrics of the people who actually care. And it always is about the people who actually care. So whether those people were there or not, like ultimately doesn't matter. So I definitely understand that. We were in that mindset too.
Isn't it funny though, like the context or at least I did a video on this too it's all about like hedonic adaptation, where like in the beginning, like if I have a list of 100 people and I lose 5 you know, I send out an email and I lose 10 subscribers, crushing. But then when you get to the certain point, you don't notice that at all. Like you don't care about it. And then it takes like 100. I mean, usually it would be the reverse. It's like the good thing is like the little wins don't matter anymore. And now you need to have like 1,000 people sign up in a day for it to actually change how you feel, to be excited about it. But like, what's the why were you excited before, but now you're not excited for it?
Totally. And I think this also goes to the topic of like depth, which is like, I saw someone who tweeted this. I think it was Jason Freed. He said, traffic doesn't always equal audience, something like that. And I think what he was trying to say there is that how many people actually you know, are really caring about what you do, and it's probably way smaller than whatever that number is anyways, you know. And I think that's the part that's sort of exciting, and the opportunity I think right now for anybody who is building a community is recognizing that that, you know, whoever on Instagram has 25,000 followers, but like how much do those people really care that are following? And that's not to say anything against them. It's just there's a lot out there. And I think, as always, if you can go back to your sort of super fans and you can really build a deeper, long-lasting relationship, it's just better than having a surface level number. So I think now I'm of the opinion of like, you'd rather have 10,000 true fans than like 100,000, 1 million people who are like okay about what you do and don't care that much.
Yeah, I think as long as you can get over it and get over the fact that the number is not going to change who you are or change like the integrity of your business, then that's it. And like even having this conversation is getting me to think about like how I message my stuff and put my stuff out there, where there is this urge. And it's funny because like I'll go to your website when I was like just looking up death to stock, and it's like, it's not evident how big your newsletter is, or like how many people sign up for this thing. Like that is not how you get people to sign up. You have a very small thing at the bottom, like this is a tribe of whatever, but then it's like it takes a while to find that. But for me, I'm like, well, when I put out my podcast website, I just hit 1 million downloads. So I'm like, I gotta have that big banner up front, like 1 million people downloaded this podcast. Like you said, half of those people might not have listened to it. Some of them are YouTube views, which certainly nobody like, you know, I mean, there's a small percentage of people who watch a YouTube video that go through with it. But then it's like, what's it matter? Is that changing somebody's mind? And is it changing the person's mind that you want to sign up and listen or watch what you're creating?
Yeah, I feel like you want scale, but you don't want to like have scale without depth. So I would love to have 1 million people who really care, but I don't care about 1 million people who don't care that much, if that makes sense. So I think like definitely it's not that my interest isn't to scale. I would probably, you know, love to have as many possible people who are interested in what I'm doing be a part of it, as long as they actually care to be there. And so what we're doing actually with the email, which is funny, is, and I wanted to do this like 2 years ago and I sort of just forgot about it, but we're just going to send out an email that's like, hey, it seems like you haven't been like digging what we're interested in. We're going to unsubscribe you unless you click this link. And like, I think that just shows that you have that perspective of like, I care about your time. I care about your attention and trust. And we only want people who are like actually interested in what we're doing. And everyone has different interests and different, you know, time commitments and stuff. So maybe it was for you at one point, it's not anymore, but like, that's great. You should keep, you know, doing your thing. You know?
It's so fun. You know what's funny is I just realized that I was like, oh, my friend Jason.
Oh, it's funny. Yeah,
you're the one Jason's the one that connected us.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm like, I don't know if you know, like, I might have told you the story about my friend Jason. How do you know Jason?
It's hilarious. How do I know Jason? I think I know Jason through Paul Jarvis, who Paul is like a OG blogger guy. You might maybe know him.
Yeah, he's got a lot of MailChimp stuff. Email newsletter.
Yeah, I think he's also one of these people that like has a really tight knit tribe. And so I was lucky I sort of met them somehow early on, and I just really like how they approach things too. I think it's a very similar mindset.
Both those guys, Paul Jarvis and Jason Zook, definitely are people to look at for like how to present yourself authentically online.
Yeah.
Like Jason does it so well in how he presents his, like him and his wife with, they have Wandering Aimfully now, which is a site they just launched, but it's, and how they communicate through everything. It's like, they're being so authentic and weird, and they clearly don't care what people think about themselves, but it's beautiful and like high quality, and they just show what can be done when you're being true to yourself. And like Paul with his email newsletter, it's one of those newsletters that I don't read every one, but every time, like the dude's so consistent. Every Sunday you get in your inbox and like, you know, I read maybe 15 to 20% of them, but I never unsubscribe because I'm like, this dude is like, he's so authentic, and like he's such a great writer, and you know that he's always going to be putting out quality stuff. And for me, I just like to be able to see what he's doing and how he's messaging his stuff, because I think like you can have like these role models to look up to.
Yeah, totally. And that consistency is really important, and I think that's what leads to the depth over time. And that's something that I think we're really good about with Death to Stock, which is maybe like the other, I guess, advice thing is like, we sent an email without fail every month with photos. Like we literally just kept at it year after year. And I think, that probably helped people see these people just aren't trying to rip me off. They actually like, you know, mean what they're about. They are, they're doing what they say.
There's so much there when it comes to consistency, I feel like, and it's hard to like pinpoint. There's not just one reason why consistency works. Like even for me doing that, I've done now, this is, I mean, actually, so I record a few of these out, so this is going to be released in like over a month, but it's been over a year. So like a year and maybe a month of releasing the podcast every single week. And before that it was scattered. It wasn't consistent. And like, my audience didn't grow, and it never would have if I didn't just put it out once a week. And I think like one, you're getting better. You're like learning about how to interview and how to connect and how to find good guests. Your show's growing, and then you have a little bit more legitimacy where you can book bigger guests on the show, which make for better episodes. And then it's also the fact that your audience comes to expect it. That they're like, well, where's the podcast every week? It's funny because there's that paradox where in the beginning there's nobody listening. So there's no incentive for you to, you know, commit to, I'm going to release this every single week. And it takes a long time before you ever do have an audience that cares or is like interested in it. So it's like, how do you push through those times when it just feels like, oh, why am I even doing, what's the point of releasing an episode or sending it out an email this week or this month, because nobody's gonna see it anyway.
Yeah. And that's why it goes back to if there's just one person or 5 people that you feel like you're actually making an impact with, it becomes so much easier to, I think, get through that, knowing that, even if it's just a few people. But I think that's definitely the process, is like, you start, nobody cares. You are consistent, you start learning, you start getting better, you get more understanding of maybe what your audience might want. And it's all this like ladder like process. And I think one thing we did early on that was a good experiment that I think turned out to be something that became a bit of a philosophy was when we did our first logo. We had a friend who his name is Brandon Reich, and he's like an insane graphic designer. Like I think he did the Blink-182 logo, like Britney Spears, Justin Timberlake, crazy people. And because we had a connection to him, we had him do our logo, and we did a video on him doing our logo. And I feel like in that way, it was like we were still new, we were still totally green, but suddenly we're aligned with like this guy who has some credibility. And then what happens is, like, once you make the video with Brandon Reich, who does your logo, now you can tell that story to the next person. So then we want to do an email collaboration, and it's like, hey, here's a weird thing we did with Brandon. It's a logo. What if we did something like, and it's kind of like this like step by step. And I think a podcast is the same in terms of you get one guest through some random connection that you had. And then because of that, you have a different guest, and then it kind of builds from there all the way to The Rock.
All the way to The Rock.
The way to point at that. So.
You know what's so sad is that did I tell you I'm doing a jingle competition?
I saw that.
Yeah.
I saw Pharrell in some tweet mix. So.
Pharrell didn't tweet me back, but you know what's funny?
I heard he's busy these days. I was texting the other day. And
yeah. He's hard to get a hold of. My girlfriend was making fun of me last night because I was just on the computer and she like saw my to-do list. I swear to God, on the to-do list, it was tweet Pharrell.
That's amazing.
That's but that's like what we were talking about with like being weird and like just not really, that the fact that that's on my to-do list makes me very happy. And like, I didn't even plan on her seeing that or ever talking about it. But I was like, I have to tweet Pharrell. I need to make sure he knows.
Reminder.
The podcast competition is closing. But so the sad thing about it is that the competition closed last week as of this recording, and we will be announcing the winner in like 2 weeks. I'm going to be like holding the voting on Monday.
That's awesome.
So unfortunately, we cannot play the jingle.
Oh,
you know what I mean? I would have been able to play the jingle. People are going to be expecting it, and now I'm going to have to set up a soundboard just for that one jingle. Right. But I've got some amazing jingles. I've narrowed it down to 4 finalists, and I'm going to have my audience vote for the best one.
That's awesome. But, you're doing exactly everything we're discussing now too. It's like, you've involved the audience, and it's just fun. I feel like not that I only like making things for the weird, but like all of the weirdest stuff that we do is like the most enjoyable, tends to go the best. Like, and when you think about early adoption and like the customer curve, I don't know if you've ever seen that, like early adopters to early majority to the masses. Like the weird are the ones who get involved first. So they're the people who raise their hand. So when you're doing something like getting The Rock on the show, it's like easy for certain people to see that and be like, that's for me.
Yeah. And then you just can't overdo it and annoy. Like I feel, and then maybe this is just me being neurotic, but I'm like, all right, I definitely can't talk about every episode.
Sure. I don't know about every episode. I will say that the farther you take something that is not expected to be taken far, I think sometimes the better with weird stuff. So like when you really commit and like, do something all out, people are like, because what that signals is exactly what we were talking about. It's like the no agenda thing. It's like, I didn't have to go through all this trouble to build this website, to make this tweet thing, to, shoot this video or whatever. But I wanted to, and it's not to sell you or anything like that. It's just like a fun thing we're doing together. Yeah.
I think what it is there needs to be a purpose behind like anything that you're creating, and like if it was repetitive and it was the same thing every time, then it's not fun anymore. It needs to get weird. It is about taking that idea, whatever it is, and being like, all right, well, let's try this. And it's like having those ideas where you're like, well, that would be funny if somebody did that. And then just doing it. Because most people think, well, that'd be funny, but it's not going to make me money. It's not practical. How am I going to execute on it? They think of every excuse to not do it.
And that's almost what I was saying too in conversations where people are like, well, I'm going to put together like the typical thing, but then I had this other, and it's exactly that. It's like that's what attracts people, I think, early on. And I know Paul, one thing he has done very well is, I don't know if you've seen like the rat logo that he has on his site, because he owns rats.
Yeah.
And he's got his rat people. So like, he talks about rats. He posts their pictures. Sometimes he'll send like health updates on his rats. And I think it's a fun texture of who that person is, that helps the right audience self-select in.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And then I think what I was going to say before too was when you were talking about like, well, you get this person, then you interview this person, and there's going to be times when it's like really scary and you get really nervous.
For sure.
And whenever you're doing a project that you're really anxious because you've never done it before. You've never done anything like it. And then the more that you do those things and put yourself in those situations, they become normal. And then you could have that interview with that like A-list celebrity or whoever it is every single time, and it's not going to feel weird.
Totally.
And it's eventually going to become natural if you do it enough. And then there's maybe going to be something else that scares the shit out of you, that you can push yourself a little bit further. But if we shy away from it, and for many years, I didn't date, and it built up. It was like maybe 4 or 5 years of not dating, going on any dates. And like, I had all the excuses in the world from like being focused on my business and like freelancing and whatever, that I just didn't. And it built up to this intense anxiety to where literally going out on a date, like the day before, I'd be like nervous, shaking, man, I can't do it. I can't even go out. And like so many times I would flake and I wouldn't show up. And then eventually I was like, all right, you know what, dude, if you're going to live your life like this, every day you're just going to be like nervous and scared to go out and meet a girl. Like just do it. And then the first one was really terrifying. Yeah. And the next one was a little bit easier. And then eventually all the walls broke down, and then my anxiety went away.
Yeah.
And you have to do those things you have to be uncomfortable to eventually get comfortable.
Yeah. And I totally know what you mean. You sort of build, it's so interesting because all this stuff is just like, it's just an idea or like a mental picture you have of something. Like, let's say it's hosting a show or interviewing someone or even just emailing somebody. Like, it's very possible that, someone listening might be very nervous just to send an email to someone they don't know, or to reach out to that, brand or whatever. And it's really easy to start building that idea, this like little mental picture of what it means to email somebody into something so much bigger than it really is. And it is almost like this big cloudy, like, haze of complexity where it's like, I can't send that email. It's like, this is this huge thing. But once you get on the other side of that and you do an interview or you do a bunch of interviews, all of a sudden you like see through the smoke and the haze and you're like, this is actually really simple and like not a big thing at all. So I think some of it is like, you can build things up in your mind, but when you get on the other side and actually experience them, you see that there's nothing to be scared of at all. And then it's like, you don't even get nervous anymore when you do that the next time.
Yeah, and like you said, a lot of times, so there's these mental images in our head that we're like just thinking about the future, and it terrifies us. But I say go ahead down that rabbit hole and see what's worst case scenario. What is the worst case scenario that you send this email? Like, I mean, they call you an asshole and they say, you wasted my time, whatever. Most likely, they're not even going to respond. But it's like, okay, cool, that happens. Get over it.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why, whether it's dating or like reaching out to people to have them on your podcast, don't rely on that one person.
Sure.
You know what I mean? You can't just be like, well, that one person, if I get them on the, I mean, obviously I'm doing this with The Rock, but it's like tongue in cheek. It's not like, I'm not taking it seriously. I think actually the art of it is taking it seriously and not seriously at the same exact time.
Exactly. Yep.
But like
perfect. You just balance that perfectly.
Yeah. So you really got it. Yeah. But then with, you can't be like, well, if I have to, if I don't get this person on, then that's it. That's why I'll reach out to 10, 15 different people. Usually 5 people will respond. Maybe 3 people end up coming on the show. And like same with dating, same with podcasting, whatever you're doing, you just have to put yourself out there in a way and not be afraid of failing.
Yeah. And it almost all goes back to what we were talking about earlier with like, if you have enough, because if you feel like you have enough, then you can reach out, and if you get rejected, it's okay. You're just going to reach out to someone else. You feel like you have other options. And so it is kind of that place of need a little bit. And yeah, it's almost like training yourself to be in that space as much as possible. I think to me is what has really helped my creative like process and productivity and work just in general. Because the more areas where you have the mental picture sort of built up, that is a wall you need to knock down to see that there's nothing scary on the other side, the slower you're going to move, productivity wise. So I actually think like the best like productivity hack or the best like business hack is actually taking a step back and understanding where are those areas that are, complex or hazy or hard to step into, and start kind of dissecting why that might be, or having that mental conversation that lets you get past that.
You just got to keep pushing stuff out there and not worry as much about the result. We have a lot of expectations and like there's a lot that we want to accomplish, and a lot of times we feel too anxious, like we want to get everything done right away, right now. And it's cliche, but it is like, you just try to enjoy the moments when you're actually building something, because you're definitely going to look back on those moments like with nostalgia in the end and be like, man, that was so cool. Like back when like nobody cared about what I was doing. It was like a grind at times, but we were able to get through it and get to the other side.
Yeah, it's very energizing. I'm sure, like with your dating example, like once you start to say like, oh, I'm okay, actually, like it sucks until that, but then once you start feeling that, it's like very energizing, and it sort of like boosts your confidence a little bit, because you're like, oh, okay, like I'm good now,
Yeah, I think a big thing too is like having self-awareness. And like I definitely know people who don't date, and they don't think that, I mean, and like clearly they do want to, but they're kind of tricking themselves into believing that they are successful at dating. When it's like, well, you're not actually trying, you're not putting yourself out there, and you're not taking the steps to improve.
Right.
So you need to have that self-awareness to be like, I am, like, even if it's just to yourself and you're lying to everybody else, but when you look in the mirror and you just tell yourself, I'm not where I want to be right now, I think that's like the first step to be able to change and improve.
Yeah, like rock bottom is like how we all change, right? Like it's not until you like see how bad it is that you decide to, like, when you accept that, then you can like take a step forward. So I think sometimes it's like you have to almost get to that place where you realize like, okay, this is a problem, I need to deal with it. That's when you're able to sort of step forward.
What were some of those lessons when you were growing the business to make sure, like you said, you kept the spirit of it all?
Sure. Well, so my first co-founder, Allie, who I'm still friends with, one good lesson that I think I learned from her was we were very like open in dialogue about like how we were feeling about the business. So like, as things progressed, like we'd always have a conversation, like maybe once a month or once every 2 months, like, are you still having fun with this? Like, is this still cool? Like, where does this fit in your life? Like, and especially because I was just out of school and she's like maybe 3 years older than me or something. So she was kind of like getting like established. She's a designer. She's a design studio with her husband now. I feel like it was helpful that we always had like a step back discussion, because then you don't get so lost like in the weeds. And there was a certain point where we sat down and got coffee and she's like, I don't think I want to do this anymore. I have a design studio with my husband. I think like that's growing. This death to stock thing, like that's growing. Like, I think I want to do this. And I'm like, amazing. Like, thank you for, telling me that. Like, let's figure out what we can make happen. So I think like, I guess to your question about like how you keep things like going is if you're so heads down all the time where you can't have that conversation, or if I was like going to attack her for like, you can't leave this business, blah, blah, blah. It's like, I think that leads to some of the negative outcomes we're talking about. So I think being able to remove the biggest mistake I made, which is also the biggest lesson, was wrapping my like self in the business. And so I think anything you're doing that is like really putting your self-worth into the business, I think this is something a lot of people talk about, is an area where you're going to be not as clear-headed about what the business needs. You're going to be more short-term focused. So I think the areas that I got into trouble with, it was probably like a 2-year period. Like the first 3 years, I feel like things were like, the magic was there and everything. Like I was definitely approaching it the right way. And then probably there's like a 2-year span of like, just, putting too much of myself, like I was the company versus me being David, who like the company's a thing, but I also have interests. It was like all too wrapped up in that. So
was it a bit of ego to be like,
I think that would be maybe common. I don't think that it was an ego thing for me, because I almost feel like I like shy, like it was more like a fear thing. So it wasn't like boisterous, like put myself out there. It was more like, this is a house of cards, and if I don't keep things going, like it's going to fall apart.
Right. And then if it falls apart, then your life falls apart.
Me? Right. Yeah. Who is David if I don't have this thing? And I think that's a common place to sort of get to, especially with maybe your first business, you find some success or whatever. And actually it kind of came to a head when like we're talking about where you have to like hit the edge to sort of realize, I'd planned a trip to go to Thailand actually. And 2 days before I left, I got shingles, which I don't know if you know what shingles is. It's like, basically it's typically in people who are much older. It's chicken pox coming back. And the only reason why it would happen with someone like me is if I was very stressed out and my immune system was down. So I did not go to Thailand. I was sick for probably a month or something like that. Very thrown off balance. I definitely feel for people who have illnesses, especially chronic now, because your mindset changes so quickly when you get sick like that. So I took like a month of not working, being sick, and that was a wake-up call for me to, I didn't think I was that stressed until my body was like, hey, you're so stressed, this is going to happen to you now.
Yeah. I always think of Kanye West said in a song, having money is not everything, not having it is. Same thing with health. Like when you don't have your health, when you have your health, nobody thinks about it. It's like, cool, everything's great, everything's grand. And then when all of a sudden, like you start getting these symptoms and you're like, what is going on with my body? It's really scary. And there's like this sense of not having control.
Exactly.
Everything feels like it's falling apart. But then at the same time, you're awake to what's really important and like what you need to be focusing on. And like maybe this business shouldn't come before the health of me and my employees.
It's almost like the email example of like, it felt like this giant task to send that email. I feel like with the business, there was like simple things that could be done in the company that because I was so wrapped up, whatever with the company, it was like, that felt like a huge effort. So like making that one thing happen now feels like a big effort, or feels like a scary thing, even though I'd been used to it maybe before. It's not always very logical, like the dating thing. It's like, this isn't that logical. Like I shouldn't really care that much, but for some reason, this, the way I was relating to the business, I think was very unhealthy. So I got sick. That was the wake up call. Probably spent the next year, I'd say, working on changing my relationship to my work. And I'm very happy that happened now, cause I feel like totally different. And it's weird cause if you're somebody who works a lot, you can still kind of keep the plates spinning. So it's like, I don't know how much people would have really seen in the business that like anything was different, even though I was like clearly stressed and eventually sick, and then eventually just like rebuilding myself and like not working on the company that much. So maybe other people think the plates are still spinning, but I was definitely changed my focus from the company to me. I was very lucky that in a way I had the luxury of doing that because the business was at a place that I was able to have more space.
And then, so how did you find that balance between the two of them? And like practically speaking, like what do your days look like now compared to what they did look like before?
So different. I think like all things, when you correct, you overcorrect. So you swing the other way. But I think that's necessary. So I think I took a month. Well, aside from being sick, I think I took a month-ish break. I just couldn't speaking of the grind thing, like I just couldn't grind at that point. Like I couldn't like sit down and like really put in, and I love that. Like I like working hard, not cause I feel like I have to, cause it's enjoyable. I think it took correcting the other way and then finding where that balance is. I wish I had like an exact answer. I feel like it's such a process in terms of changing the way your habits are in the day. First, you start recognizing a lot. Like I was very like disciplined. Like I have to be up at this time. I have to work out. And I had to remove that to free myself up a little bit so that I could come back to that eventually, from like a positive space, if that makes sense. So I'd say my days today are less rigid, less disciplined than they were at that time where I was like really trying to like make something happen or whatever.
It sounds like it went back to experimenting. Where the experimenting of the business to make something stick, it's very much about like, okay, how can I actually get my life in balance? And I think that happens a lot too with like, if you're trying to build healthy habits in your life, it's not one size fits all. Sometimes it works well with incentives. Sometimes people have a better time sticking habits when they have a partner, like an ally to help motivate them and keep them going. Sometimes those things don't work at all for anybody. And it comes because like everybody's so individual. We need to really identify and see how we're able to bring these things into our lives and change our lives.
Yeah, and you just start recognizing stuff that you thought was like maybe really healthy and like wasn't. And that's what I mean about me feeling like I had to be up at a certain time every morning to get to work isn't healthy if I feel like I have to. If I want to do that, then that's awesome. And it's not a stressful thing in my life. It's part of what I want to be doing, and it's positive. So I think a lot of it was flipping. One thing I talk about is like from needs to choices. And I think anytime you can get into a space where you're choosing to do something, or you feel like you have options instead of I need to do this, I'm forced into doing this, it just goes better and it's more enjoyable. So I try to always move into that space of like, I have choices, I have options, I'm choosing to do this, and because I'm choosing to do that, it's enjoyable for me.
I feel like this conversation was like a book. I feel like there's a book within the lines.
Maybe there's I'm gonna shout out Azul Terrones. I don't know if you know him. He's a book coach whisperer, and so I've told him many times that at some point I need to call Azul, because he's the person that helps you craft your idea or whatever.
Dude, yeah, that's definitely. Is that something that's like on your mind?
Oh, I don't know, not right now. Maybe at some point in the future. I think that'd be fun. I write a lot, so I definitely enjoy writing. Is that something that you've done before or thinking about?
No. Well, it's funny, like when I started this whole like, hey, let me create original content, for some reason, maybe it's because my friends all had blogs. I was like, well, I'm going to start a blog. And then I started writing blogs and sharing blog posts. And I was like, I'm a filmmaker. What am I doing? I'm wasting my time. I spent my entire life making videos. And that's obviously where like so much is going now. Like YouTube is like massive. And I was like, all right, actually, maybe I'm not going to write. But I do actually really enjoy writing. And the writing goes into films and videos, and like there's obviously like everything, like whether you're making a tweet or a description for Instagram, if you can't communicate properly, like in a short period of time, and get your message across, and like have some joy and some weirdness in how you write, then you're probably not going to be successful. So
I'm glad you chose to do video, because obviously the world needs it. So
thanks, man. So maybe writing down the road, maybe a book, but it's like the thing with minimalism and trying to find out like what you should be doing right now, you have to say no to a lot of stuff. And writing a book, if I said, okay, I'm going to write a book, well, guess what? Like I probably can't do a podcast. I probably can't do all this other stuff that I'm currently doing, at least not in its current form where it's just me, right? If I had an employee and like the circumstances were different, maybe. But you have to set your priorities. Yeah, and it's going to take a lot longer than you think too. So like if you say yes to a book, potentially you're signing up for a very long, like not just no now, no 2 years from now, So I think that's the other thing. But you don't have to take on that approach. I mean, I've been very inspired by this author I found on Twitter, and I'm blanking on his name right now, but I saw he put out a book on Kindle, and he tweeted the next day, writing my next book. And I saw like maybe 3 months later, the next book was out. And so like, I don't think he was overthinking it. And I think he was just like making it happen. So I liked seeing someone who was like not necessarily feeling like it had to be this giant thing. Might have been Colin Wright. I don't know if you know Colin Wright.
No, maybe. I don't remember.
He's written like 12, 14 books, sometimes short, sometimes long. But
it's
like
short.
But it's like, sometimes we overthink it. Sometimes we think, well, we need the about page. We need to have all this extra stuff. And it's like, one of my favorite books is Flinch by Julian Smith. Super short. You could read that in a night. But also very impactful. And maybe like it's always about starting small. Like maybe it's just a manuscript. Maybe you start out and just make a trailer or like a short film that could be turned into a feature film down the road. Yeah, it's sort of like the weird thing again. Like I tweeted this the other day. I was like, I wonder if you could make a book sort of like an album or something like that. Like you do album art, and then you do like, 12 tracks or whatever, and each one is like a major theme, and then like, put it out like a mixtape or something like that. But it's actually a book. Like I feel like, you could approach it from a different, there's no rules, right? There's no like, no book has to be a certain length. It doesn't need to be printed on paper. Obviously now with like digital and stuff. So maybe you could experiment with what a book even means. Yeah, that's great, dude. Do you have any closing thoughts? That's a great question. I don't think I have any right now. I appreciate you having me over. I like the serendipitous like conversation like this. I think it's always interesting to see where it goes. So I just enjoy like having conversations where there's no agenda. We're just going to discuss stuff and wherever it takes us. So thanks for having me over, and thanks for, making it
be like this.
Yeah, man. Thank you. I think it's definitely clarifying for me. I mean, I'm pretty selfish when it comes to these two sometimes.
That's
where I'm
the way
like,
to do it, for
I
sure.
just really love like having these conversations. Yeah. And I'm like,
that's good.
Isn't that amazing? Just to be able to learn from other people and to be able to say, well, yeah, like, that really resonates. That sticks. And like these kind of conversations, I think not only does it change like the two of us and maybe how we interact with our audiences and our lives in the future, but I think hopefully it changes and gets other people to think about this stuff too.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm going to shout out my girlfriend, Patty, and I'm going to shout out Sean Singh, who is basically running the show day to day at the stock right now. So
that's awesome, dude.
Yeah.
Is that where we should send people to?
Yeah. I can send you a link that is easy to sign up for my personal newsletter, which is Creative Caffeine. That's where I'm like having all of the fun, like experimenting and stuff. But death2stock.com is how you will find, it's death to the stock photo, but you can also go to death2stock.com. And then, yeah, Creative Caffeine, which is my newsletter. I take a very interesting approach on that in that it is not at a fixed time or day. I actually only share things when I feel like I have something to share. So usually it's at least 1 to 3 times a week, sometimes 5, sometimes 18. Like and I'm very upfront about that. And it's like, yeah, it could change. I might experiment with something. So it's kind of like the weird place where I'm playing a little bit.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's amazing that it's working because
well, it's a swing the other direction, right? Like I said, like, hey, here's like this monthly structured photos, like, and then when I said I want to do this other thing, I said, hey, it's gonna be the opposite. It's gonna be everything else, you know. Like, I'm not gonna. It's gonna come late at night, early in the morning. It's gonna be long, short. It'll be media.
And I think it's like you probably, for most people, you have to master the consistency part first. It's kind of like Picasso, right? Like he was like a master painter. He he did traditional paintings beautifully, and then he's like, all right, let's make this shit weird.
yeah, totally. And that's where it's been fun to have other people's voices as well. So I'm sharing when other people reply to me. That's another weird thing. If you're on this list, I might share what you write to me, as long as if you ask me not to, I won't.
Yeah.
But when I get random emails from people, I'll like post those in the email. So I don't know. It's just weird experiment.
I love it, man. I'm going to sign up after we talk.
Awesome. Right on.
Cool.
Well, yeah, thanks again. And I'm sure we'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks for doing this. Have you enjoyed this podcast? Have you gotten some value out of it? Has it helped you on your creative or personal journey? If so, I would love it if you'd consider making a contribution to Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/MattDiavella, I've got a little membership community that I've started to create. And it really is starting to feel like a community. Lots and lots of people are contributing questions. I'm answering them on these secret AMA podcast episodes that are exclusive to Patreon. I've also got a secret vlog where I show you an intimate look at my personal and work life and how I set things up here at the Ground Up Show and how I make my videos. So if you want to get access to these things, and you want to also just contribute to the show and help to keep it ad-free and help to make sure that I can keep doing this full time, which is honestly a dream, head over to patreon.com/MattDiavella and be a part of this journey. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you guys next week.